Marabelle knew the sound of a wagon passing her road. This was not that. This was wheels slowing in the dark, deliberate, careful, almost polite. The kind of slow that did not mean a stranger was lost. It meant somebody had found exactly what he came looking for. From the porch of her failing wheat farm, Mara watched the yellow line of lantern light beneath the hayloft door vanish, all at once. Not dim, not flicker, just gone, as if Caleb Rowe had covered the flame with his bare hand. And that was the first time Mara understood the quiet hired man in her barn was not hiding from bad weather. He was hiding from men. And now those men were on the north road. Mara did not call out. She did not step inside for her father's rifle. She sat there with both hands folded in her lap and listened while the wagon crept past the cottonwoods, paused at the gate, and rolled on. Only when the sound faded did she breathe again. By morning she had decided she would ask him plainly, calmly, like a woman who had not spent the last 5 nights wondering why a man with a broken axle spoke like he had once owned rooms bigger than her entire house. She found him in the barn before sunrise, mending a strap with the careful patience of a man who never wasted motion. "You knew they were coming," she said. Caleb did not look up. "I knew someone might. That is not an answer." "No, ma'am." He set the strap down then. He was tall, browned, with city hands that had been forced to remember how work was done. His little girl, Elsie, was still asleep in the loft above them, wrapped in one of Mara's old quilts, trusting the farm more than Mara trusted its father. "Are they lawmen?" Mara asked. "No." "Are they creditors?" Caleb's mouth tightened. "Not yours." That was the wrong answer. Mara felt anger come up clean and sharp. "Mr. Rowe, I have a bank note due, 2 dry fields, a town that enjoys watching me fail, and a banker's man circling my land like a buzzard. I do not have room for a stranger's trouble." "I know. You do not know." His eyes lifted to hers. "I know more than you think." There it was again, that educated stillness, that careful voice, that terrible habit of speaking as if he had measured the whole room before anyone else saw the walls. "Then tell me who you are," she said. He was quiet for too long. "Give me 10 days," Mara laughed once, without humor. 10 days. I will finish the lower ditch. I will brace the west fence. If you want me gone after that, Elsie and I will leave before breakfast. And the men? They will not cross onto your land. You sound certain. I know their kind, do you? A shadow moved through his face. Yes. Mara should have sent him away that morning. She knew that later. She knew it the way a person knows a door was open before the storm came in. But then Elsie appeared at the ladder, hair tangled, cheeks warm from sleep, clutching the quilt around her shoulders. "Miss Mara," the child whispered, "are the hens awake yet?" And something in Mara, some old sealed room, unlocked before she could stop it. So she gave Caleb 10 days. In 10 days he became impossible to ignore. Not because he was loud. Caleb Rowe was never loud. He dug the lower ditch in 4 days by reading the slope, like it had spoken to him personally. He repaired the west fence without asking where the spare nails were because he had already found them, sorted them, and saved the bent ones for hinge work. He worked until the heat hardened the ground, then moved to shade and fixed what shade could cover. The farm began to sound different. Water ticked through the new channel. The barn door stopped groaning. The pump handle no longer screamed every morning like an accusation. And Elsie, with the brutal ease of children, settled into Mara's kitchen as if she had been expected all along. She named the milk cow Duchess, even though the cow was plainly not a duchess. She asked whether every chicken had a personality, then assigned one before Mara could answer. She learned to roll pie dough with both elbows locked and her tongue caught between her teeth. One afternoon, while they shelled beans, Elsie asked, "Were you always here alone?" Mara kept her eyes on the bowl. "Since my father died." "Did people visit?" "People come when they need something." Elsie considered that. "That is not the same as visiting." "No, it was not. Were you lonely?" Elsie asked. Mara dropped a bean into the bowl. The sound was too small for how large the question felt. "Sometimes." "I was lonely after my mamma died," Elsie said. "Papa was there, but he was lonely too, so it felt like two lonely people sitting in one room." Mara looked at the child. Elsie did not look embarrassed. She only sorted another bean, as if she had named the weather. "Are you less lonely now?" she asked. Mara had survived drought, debt, flu, and every public cruelty a small town could dress up as concern. That question nearly undid her. "A little," she said. Elsie nodded. Then she put two beans in the wrong bowl, and pretended she had not. By the second week the town noticed. Red Willow always noticed what could be turned into a weapon. Mara drove in for lamp oil, flour, and salt on a Tuesday. Caleb hitched the wagon before she reached the barn. She told him she could do it herself. He said he knew. Elsie rode between them and narrated the road like a queen conducting an inspection. For 3 miles, Mara almost forgot who people believed she was. Then Red Willow reminded her. The dry goods store went quiet when she entered. Not silent. Exactly worse. The careful quiet of people holding words behind their teeth. Mrs. Varn, behind the counter, looked past Mara through the front window, where Caleb was lifting flour sacks into the wagon bed. "You have help now," she said. "For the ditch." "He is rather fine help." Mara counted coins onto the counter. Mrs. Varn leaned closer, lowering her voice in a way that made sure every woman by the ribbon shelf could hear. "People are wondering what a man like that expects from a woman in your position." Mara's hand stilled. "My position. Well." Mrs. Varn smiled. "A woman alone, a farm in arrears, a figure not exactly suited to tempting charity. Folks only wonder what arrangement makes it worth his while." The shame did not surprise Mara. That was the ugliest part. It arrived like an old guest who knew where to hang its coat. She took her parcel, said, "Keep the change," though there was no change, and walked out. Caleb was on the steps. His face told her he had heard enough. "Get in the wagon," she said. He looked at the store door. Caleb. In a moment. He went inside. Mara stood by the wagon, mortified and furious, listening to his boots cross the plank floor. His voice was low. Mrs. Varn's rose once. Then it stopped. When he came out, he did not look proud. He looked cold. "What did you say?" Mara asked. "The truth. That woman will make it worse." "No," he said. "She will not." The certainty in his voice frightened Mara more than any anger would have. On the ride home, Elsie fell asleep against Mara's arm. Mara did not move for the entire journey, though her shoulder ached by the 2nd mile. Caleb noticed. Of course he did. "She does not trust easily," he said softly. "She trusts everybody." "No," Caleb said. "She is generous. That is different." Mara looked down at the child's small hand resting open against her skirt. She had no answer for that. 3 days later, Tobe Granger came back from the bank. Mara saw his horse first, then the pale envelope in his hand. Tobe worked for Victor Hale, who owned the bank, half the town's pride, and none of it's mercy. Caleb reached the porch before Mara did. She never saw him hurry. He simply appeared where trouble was going. Tobe slowed when he noticed him. "Miss Bell," Tobe said, touching his hat. "Mr. Hale asked me to remind you the extension expires at month's end." "She remembers," Caleb said. Tobe blinked. "And you are?" "Working. This is bank business." "Then say the figure." Tobe stared. "The figure, the outstanding principal, interest, penalty fees, acceleration clause. Say it." Mara looked at Caleb. Tobe shifted in the saddle. "I do not discuss a lady's account with hired men." "Then tell Mr. Hale Miss Bell will answer through counsel." Mara's heart kicked. Tobe's mouth twisted. "She has counsel? She does now." The yard went very still. Tobe looked at Mara. Mara, by some grace she did not understand, said nothing. Tobe left with the envelope still in his hand, and, when he was gone, Mara turned on Caleb. "I do not have a lawyer. I know a good one in Cheyenne." "You know a lawyer?" "Yes." "A drifter with a broken axle knows a Cheyenne lawyer who handles bank notes." Caleb looked toward the road. Mara watched him put one hand into his coat and touch a folded paper there before he seemed to remember she could see him. "10 days," he said. "They are nearly over." "I know." That night the North Road came alive again. 2 riders this time. They stopped beyond the fence and sat their horses for nearly a minute under the cold white moon. Mara watched from behind in the barn loft. No light burned. The next morning she found the name, not carved deeply, just scratched into the post beside the ladder, as if a man had marked it in the dark without meaning to see Mercer. Mara stood staring at it until the letters changed the air in the barn. Caleb came in behind her and stopped. "Is that you?" she asked. He did not answer quickly. That was answer enough. "My father's name was Rowe," he said. "My mother's was Mercer." So Rowe was not a lie. No, just the part that mattered. His face tightened. "Yes." Mara turned from the post. "Who is looking for you, Mr. Mercer?" "My brother." "And what does your brother want?" "Everything I did not sign over." Before she could ask what that meant, wheels thundered up the road. Not one carriage. 3. Black lacquer, polished brass, matched horses, men in town coats, stepping onto her dirt yard as if mud itself should apologize for touching their boots. Elsie, who had been feeding the hens, went white. "Go to the cellar," Caleb said. The child obeyed before Mara could ask why. A man climbed down from the first carriage. He was broad, dark-haired, perfectly dressed, and carried himself with the exhausting confidence of someone who had never had to knock twice. "Caleb," he called. Caleb stepped onto the porch beside Mara. Not in front of her, beside her, Silas. Silas Mercer smiled. It was not a family smile. It was a contract wearing teeth. "I would prefer to discuss this privately." "No." Silas's eyes moved to Mara. "Then Miss Bell may hear enough to understand why she should step away from matters above her concern." Mara's jaw set. "This is my porch." Silas took a folded packet from his coat. "The North Star consolidation closes in 32 days. Under the founding charter, your proxy is required. You still hold 21% of Mercer Agricultural Trust. Your refusal has delayed a lawful acquisition across 2 territories." Mara heard only one word clearly. North Star, the name on Victor Hale's paperwork, the company pressuring farms along the valley. She turned to Caleb. "North Star is yours?" "No," Caleb said. Silas laughed softly. "It is ours. He prefers moral theater." Caleb's voice stayed low. I opposed it for 3 years, and then abandoned the board to wander with a child and repair fences for lonely women. Mara felt that strike land exactly where Silas aimed it. Caleb's hand closed, but he did not move. Silas lifted a second paper. Miss Bell, First Union Bank filed acceleration on your note this morning. Principal, interest, and penalties are due in full within 14 days. Mara's mouth went dry. However, Silas continued, Mercer Agricultural Trust is prepared to satisfy the debt immediately in exchange for clear title to your land. There it was, not a storm. A machine. Silas had not come to bargain with Caleb. He had come to put Mara under the wheel. She looked at Caleb. You knew this could happen. His silence was worse than any confession. I knew they could use the bank, he said. I did not know Hale would move this fast. But you knew, yes? Mara closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she was no longer looking for anything gentle. Get off my property, she said to Silas. His eyebrows rose. I would caution you, I said. Get off my property. My father's rifle is inside, and Red Willow may hate a fat, unmarried woman with bad credit, but even this county understands trespass. Silas studied her. Then he tipped his hat, as if he had not been insulted but mildly entertained. 14 days, Miss Bell. He left. Tobe Granger rode after the carriages and gave Mara one look. That was almost pity. That was when she knew the town already had its version. She turned to Caleb. Pack Elsie's things, Mara? No, your family is buying the valley through North Star. You knew enough to hide your name. You let me feed your child and make room in my house while your brother held the paper that could take it. I did not choose your farm. The axle, real. The rest, also real. Not enough. His face changed then, as if those 2 words found the unguarded place. I wanted to help you, and I wanted to believe that did not make me a fool. He stepped back like she had raised a hand. Mara hated that it hurt her to see it. You can let my lawyer? No, he can fight the note. No, Caleb, I cannot save this land with you standing here giving Red Willow a story it already wants to tell. His voice was rougher when he answered. What story? That I lured a rich man, that I found out who you were, and played at kindness for money, that a woman like me could only be wanted if she had a scheme attached. Caleb looked ill. Anion, who knows you, nobody here knows me. Elsie appeared at the door with her bundle clutched to her chest. She had heard enough to understand the shape of leaving. I do not want to go, she whispered. Mara's throat tightened. I know, sweetheart. Then why? Mara looked at Caleb over Elsie's head. Because sometimes staying makes the hurt worse. Elsie began to cry without making a sound. Mara kissed the top of the child's head once and walked inside before she could change her mind. She stood in the kitchen and listened to the wagon pull away. She did not cry. She washed 2 cups. She swept the same corner twice. She folded Elsie's forgotten drawing, a crooked cow wearing a crown, and set it beside the stove. At sunset, 1 horse came back. Not the wagon. 1 horse, hooves stopped at the porch, then left. Mara opened the door. A paper was tucked under the blue sugar tin by the rail. No letter, no apology, no explanation. Just a bank receipt stamped that afternoon, paid in full. Every dollar of her father's note, every penalty Victor Hale had piled on top of it. Settled. Mara sat down on the porch step and held the receipt while the sky went from gold to black. The paper did not change. She turned it over, expecting a condition, a trap, a sentence in small print that would tell her what the kindness would cost. There was nothing. Only the bank stamp, only the impossible fact. Caleb Mercer had paid the debt that could have purchased her silence, then ridden away without staying to be thanked. The practical part of Mara said this changed nothing. His money came from the same machine that had tried to swallow her farm. His name was attached to every acre North Star had threatened. His silence had cost her trust. But another part of her, the part Red Willow had spent years teaching her to bury, knew something else. A man who pays a debt in secret and leaves before praise can reach him is not buying gratitude. He is trying too late to make one wrong thing right. 2 days later, Mara went into town because she needed coffee and because she refused to hide from people who had never learned shame. Red Willow was ready. Men outside the feed store spoke just loudly enough. Always wondered what she was after. Mercer money, looks like. Some women take what chances they can get. Mara loaded coffee into the wagon with hands so steady they felt borrowed. She drove home. Only when the town disappeared behind the ridge did she stop the horse and press the heel of her hand against her chest. She had heard versions of that sentence all her life. Too big, too plain, too stubborn, too late, too grateful for attention. She had survived every word by pretending words could not bruise. But now Elsie's drawing was on her kitchen table, Caleb's receipt was in her pocket, and pretending had begun to feel like another kind of debt. The lawyer arrived the next morning. He was small, sharp-faced, and dusty from the Cheyenne road. He introduced himself as Gideon Pruitt, attorney at law, retained by Caleb Mercer before his departure. "No fee to you," he said. Mr. Mercer was explicit. Mara stared. He arranged this before Silas came? Before he wrote after the bank's man visited? He believed Mr. Hale's acceleration pattern would be useful. Pattern. Pruitt opened his case at her kitchen table. Mara poured coffee because her hands needed something ordinary to do. What he laid out was not ordinary. North Star Development had approached 43 farms across 2 territories. Bank extensions were shortened near harvest when cash reserves were lowest. Notes were accelerated through friendly lenders. Land was purchased under distressed conditions, then leased to industrial operators who never had to face the families removed to make room for them. "All lawful?" Mara asked. "Much of it," Pruitt said, "which is not the same as honest." He showed her letters Caleb had written years earlier from inside the company. Objections filed with the trust. Warnings that the shell purchases would break homestead protections if exposed in sequence. "He fought this?" Mara asked. "For 3 years, and lost?" "Yes." "So he ran." Pruitt folded his hands. "He walked away after his wife died. He did not complete divestment. Silas needs his signature to close North Star's final acquisition. Without Caleb's proxy, the entire consolidation stalls." Mara looked toward the window. "And if Silas gets the proxy? North Star closes. The farms are gone." "How many? 40? 3 confirmed, possibly more." She pressed her palms flat against the table. "What happens now?" "There is a trustee hearing in Denver in 19 days. Silas is petitioning to remove Caleb's voting rights on grounds of incapacity." Mara looked back. "Incapacity. He will claim Caleb is unstable, grief-stricken. Derelict. A wealthy stakeholder who abandoned his obligations, dragged his daughter across the West, and spent weeks performing labor on the farm of a woman with whom he had an inappropriate attachment." There it was again, the story. Red Willow's cruelty polished until it could sit in a boardroom. "He will use me," Mara said. "Yes, whether I am there or not. especially if you are not. Mara looked at Elsie's drawing, then at the receipt, then at the fields beyond the window where the new ditch carried water as if it had always known the way. "What helps him?" she asked. Pruitt did not soften the answer. Truth under oath, documents from the families, someone who can say what happened on this farm before Silas turns it into proof of madness. Mara almost laughed. The idea of her in Denver, in a room built for men like Silas Mercer, was so absurd, it became frightening only after it became clear. "I will think on it," she said. But she did not need long. That week she stood at the county meeting for the first time in 2 years. Victor Hale's attorney was explaining North Star progress in a voice made of cream and knives when Mara rose from the back row. The room shifted. People loved watching a woman like her stand because they expected the standing to end badly. "I have documentation," Mara said, "that North Star Development is controlled by Mercer Agricultural Trust, and that its purchase pattern violates the intent of the Homestead Preservation Act of 1878. The attorney blinked. "That is not germane to—" "It is precisely germane." Her voice did not tremble. That surprised her most. "This is a county meeting about land seizure. I own land. I am speaking." Someone in the back muttered. Mara turned. The muttering stopped. Afterward, 3 families approached her outside. Then 7, then 12. They spoke quietly at first, as if they were confessing a crime by admitting they had been cheated. Mara gave them Gideon Pruitt's address. "Write dates," she said. "Names, amounts, who pressured you, who witnessed it. Do not write feelings first. Write facts. Feelings can come after." Old Amos Bright, who had lost the creek parcel his father planted, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "Why are you doing this?" Mara put the receipt deeper in her pocket. "Because I am tired of them calling our silence consent." 9 days later, a letter came from Elsie. The words leaned in every direction. The spelling fought bravely and lost in places, and the paper smelled faintly of train smoke. Elsie wrote about hotels, about a woman in Laramie who owned a parrot, about Caleb being quiet in the way he got when a sadness was too heavy to carry where people could see it. Near the end she wrote, "Uncle Silas says Papa is going to be in the newspapers, and they will say he is broken in his mind. Papa says it does not matter." But he rubbed his thumb over Mama's ring like it mattered very much. "I think you would know that face—" Mara lowered the letter. "Broken in his mind, not just reckless, not just inconvenient." Silas was going to turn grief into a weapon and loneliness into evidence. And Mara's farm would be proof unless Mara walked into that room and took the proof back. That night she counted the money in her emergency jar. It was not enough for comfort. It was enough for a ticket. She wrote to Pruitt before midnight. She wrote to Mrs. Calder next door, asking her to feed the hens. Then Mara Bell, who had spent 36 years learning not to chase anything that might run from her, packed 1 dress, 3 documents, Elsie's crooked cow, and the receipt. At dawn she left the farm and did not look back. The train to Denver took 2 days. Mara sat upright the entire way with the documents in her lap, and fear tucked under her ribs like a second heart. Passengers looked at her. They always did. A woman traveling alone with a plain hat, broad shoulders, a farm dress, and a face that refused to apologize made people curious. Mara let them look. By the time the mountains rose blue and hard beyond the glass, she had read every letter from the valley twice. 43 families, accelerated notes, threats disguised as courtesy, signatures taken in back rooms, land bought cheap from people too cornered to say no. By the second reading, fear had turned to anger. Anger traveled better. Pruitt met her at the station. "The hearing is tomorrow at 9, he said as they pushed through the crowd. Silas tried to limit testimony. Denied. Tried to bar affected families' letters. Denied. The chair is not friendly? Exactly. But she dislikes being managed. What is Caleb expecting? Pruitt glanced at her. He was not expecting you. Mara looked straight ahead. Good. That evening at the boarding house someone knocked. She opened the door. Caleb stood in the hall. For a moment neither of them found the first word. He looked thinner, or perhaps only stripped of the farm's dust and usefulness. His coat fit him too well. His eyes did not. "Pruitt told me," he said. "He talks too much." "No," he said, "very little." I understood the rest. Mara leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "You should have written. I know. You should have told me what Silas would do. I know. You should have trusted me with the worst of it before it found my porch." Caleb's face tightened. "Yes?" That answer did more than excuses would have. "Elsie?" Mara asked. "With Pruitt's sister. She does not know you are here?" Mara nodded. "One thing at a time." He swallowed. "How is the farm?" "There, because of you." "Because of rain, work, and a paid receipt," she said. "Do not make it prettier than it is." "No, ma'am." The old phrase nearly broke her. She looked away first. "Sleep if you can," she said. "Will you?" "No." He almost smiled. Neither of them did. The trustee hall the next morning was built to make ordinary people feel temporary. Tall windows, polished floors, dark tables, shining like deep water. Men in fine wool moved with quiet certainty. They had the kind of hands that signed papers other people lived under. Mara took her seat near the front. Silas arrived last. He saw her. For 2 seconds his face changed. Not fear. Recalculation. That was enough. The chair, Mrs. Helena Ward, called the hearing to order. Her hair was silver, her voice flat, and her eyes sharp enough to cut ribbon. Silas's attorney spoke first. For 40 minutes he turned Caleb's grief into a business hazard. Erratic absence, failure of fiduciary duty. Emotional deterioration, pattern of irrational attachment. Then he described Caleb's weeks on Mara's farm. A man of significant wealth and obligation, he said, had hidden under an assumed name while performing manual labor for an unmarried rural woman facing foreclosure. He let that phrase hang. Unmarried rural woman, as if Mara were not a person but a stain on Caleb's judgment. Mara kept her hands folded. She had been insulted by women with sharper tongues and men with worse intentions. The difference was that this time the insult had a record keeper. Then Pruitt stood. He was not dramatic. He did not need to be. He laid out the documents one by one. Caleb's objections filed inside Mercer Trust. The North Star shell structure, the timed bank accelerations, the 43 farm letters, the map of purchases clustered around water rights. "The question," Pruitt said, "is not whether Mr. Caleb Mercer behaved conveniently for this board. Conscience is rarely convenient. The question is whether his refusal to sign was irrational, or whether it was the only rational response to a scheme designed to hide its own cruelty behind lawful form." Silas whispered to his attorney. Mrs. Ward looked at Caleb. "Mr. Mercer, do you wish to speak?" Caleb stood. He used no notes. His voice was the same voice Mara had heard in the barn. Quiet, measured, unwilling to decorate the truth. He spoke about North Star's design, about cash, poor harvest months, about water rights, about how a signature could clean a crime without changing what it was. He spoke of his wife only once. "When my wife died," he said, "I discovered that grief does not make a man noble. It only removes certain lies he no longer has the strength to tell. I could not tell the lie that this company was feeding the West while it was hollowing out the families who worked it." The room had gone very quiet. "I spent 10 days on Marabelle's farm," Caleb said. "I was there because my axle broke and she gave my daughter shelter when she had every reason to close the door. I dug a ditch because the water needed somewhere honest to go. I mended fences because they were broken. I stayed because for the first time in years the work in front of me did not require me to betray someone absent from the room." Silas's attorney rose. "This is precisely the romantic instability." "Sit down," Mrs. Ward said. He sat. Pruitt turned. "One witness." Mara stood. The room looked at her the way rooms had looked at her all her life, measuring, reducing, deciding quickly because deciding quickly is easier than seeing clearly. Mara let them have 1 second. Then she took the second back. "My name is Mara Bell," she said. "I own 74 acres outside Red Willow, Wyoming Territory. Victor Hale, through North Star Development, tried to accelerate my father's bank note and force a sale of my land. The same method was used on 43 families whose letters are in Mr. Pruitt's hand." Silas watched her with a face carved from stone. "Caleb Mercer came to my farm under a false name. That was wrong. He also repaired my fence, dug a working water channel, arranged counsel for families he did not know, paid a debt he did not owe, and left before anyone could praise him for it." Her voice did not shake. She found that remarkable. "Your attorney called his labor irrational because he cannot imagine work that does not end in ownership. He called his grief instability because he cannot imagine sorrow becoming conscience. And he called me an attachment because it is easier to make a woman into evidence than to admit she is a witness." A pen stopped scratching. Mara looked directly at Silas. "North Star did not win farms because farmers failed. It won because men with money learned exactly when honest people were weakest. That is not development. That is harvest. You harvested desperation and called it growth." Silas's jaw tightened. Mara lifted the stack of letters. "If this board wants proof of Caleb Mercer's judgment, here it is. He is the only Mercer who understood what your papers were doing to living people." She sat down for a moment. No one moved. Then Mrs. Ward took the letters. The board deliberated for less than an hour. Mara waited in the hall with her back against the wall, the receipt folded in her glove. Caleb sat across from her. They did not speak. Some silences asked to be filled. This one asked to be respected. When the board returned, Mrs. Ward read from one page. "The petition to remove Caleb Mercer's voting rights on grounds of incapacity is denied. Mr. Mercer retains his full stake and proxy authority under the founding charter." Silas went still. "The North Star consolidation is suspended pending external review of acquisition practices, lender coordination, and homestead compliance. All pending transfers connected to accelerated notes are frozen until review is complete." Silas stood. "Mr. Mercer," Mrs. Wardy said, "sit down, or your refusal will become the next entry in the record." He sat. Outside the hall, Pruitt shook Mara's hand and said something practical she did not hear. Her knees had begun to remember they were only knees. Then a small body crashed into her. Elsie had run down the corridor with her hat slipping backward and tears already on her cheeks. "You came," she said. "I did." Elsie wrapped both arms around Mara's waist and held on as if the answer had been waiting in her bones. Mara closed her eyes. Caleb stopped a few feet away. His hat was in his hands. All the control had gone out of his face, and what remained looked almost too open to look at directly. "Mara," he said. She looked at him over Elsie's hair. "Come home." 2 words. No speech, no bargain, no promise, dressed bigger than it could stand. "Red Willow?" she asked. "Wherever you are." Mara had practical answers available. She had spent her life collecting practical answers the way other women collected ribbons. But the hall was bright. Elsie was holding her, and Caleb Mercer was looking at her as if her answer mattered more than any board in the world. So she gave the only answer that did not make a liar of her heart. "Then let's go home." They returned before harvest. Red Willow had prepared to enjoy Mara's humiliation, and was visibly disappointed to find itself deprived. North Star's review halted every pending transfer in the valley. 3 families recovered deeds they had signed under pressure. Victor Hale sold his bank interest before winter and left town in a closed carriage. Nobody waved. The Bell farm changed slowly. That was the honest way of good things. The lower ditch carried water through the east field, and the second cutting came in heavier than any yield Mara had seen since her father was alive. The barn roof still leaked in hard rain. The pump still complained when the morning was cold. Work remained work, but it was no longer a house where silence sat down before she did. Elsie filled it with questions. Caleb filled it with steadiness, and Mara, to her own surprise, began to fill it with answers. The first time Elsie called her Mama. It happened while they were counting feed sacks. No ceremony, no warning, just Elsie frowning at the ledger and saying, "Mama, I think Duchess eats more than a cow should." Mara's pencil stopped. Caleb, from the doorway, went utterly still. Mara looked at the child. Elsie looked back, suddenly frightened. She had broken something. Mara set down the pencil. "Duchess has always had expensive opinions," she said. "Help me measure the oats." Elsie smiled so hard it trembled. Later, after supper, Caleb found Mara on the porch, the same porch where she had once watched his lantern go dark. The same porch where she had unfolded a receipt until her hands shook. He sat beside her and did not speak for a while. The west field was turning black under the evening sky. Frogs called from the creek bottom. Somewhere in the barn Elsie was telling the cow a secret. "She chose that word carefully," Caleb said. "I know." "So did you." Mara looked at him. He did not touch her until she reached for his hand first. That mattered. It would always matter. She thought of Mrs. Varn, of Red Willow, of every person who had taught her that love was something handed to women, who looked smaller, softer, easier, more grateful. She thought of the boardroom where men tried to make her a footnote, and she made herself a witness. She thought of a little girl's crooked cow folded in her drawer, and a receipt that had once looked impossible, and a man who had finally learned that truth delayed is still a wound, but truth acted upon can become a bridge. Mara Bell had not been waiting for a rescue. She had rescued too much of herself for anyone to claim that. She had been waiting for a life that did not ask her to shrink before it made room. And when that life came, it came with mud on its boots, a child in the kitchen, work in the fields, and a man honest enough to stand beside her instead of in front of her. She was never too much for love. She had only spent too many years surrounded by people too small to recognize it.